Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Chase Jarvis. Welcome to another episode of Chase Jarvis Live here on CreativeLive. You are tuned into the 30 Days of Genius series, specifically here at CreativeLive. What is that series? That is a series where I sit down with the world's top creatives, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders and create actionable insights to help you live your dreams in career, hobby, and life. If you're new to this series, you can go to creativelive.com/30 Days of Genius, the number 30 Days of Genius. All you gotta do is click that little blue button. It's 100% free, and then you get one of these badass interviews in your inbox every day for 30 days. Real healthy dose of inspiration and that actionable insight. My guest today, wow, she is many things. First and foremost, she's an expert on happiness and habits, and if that's not intriguing, wait for number 2 and 3. Her second thing is that she has a podcast, one of the top podcasts. It's called Happiness with Gretchen Rubin. I've already given away who my guest is. She's also an author of many, many books, most of which are #1 New York Times bestsellers. My personal favorite is called The Happiness Project. My guest today is none other than Gretchen Rubin.
Hey.
Hey. Welcome to the show. Thank you again. We'll do one more handshake, but super, super glad you're here. And I've been a fan a long time. Devoured The Happiness Project when it first came out, and I know we have a lot of the same friends, so grateful to get to sit down with you today.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy to be talking to you. One of my favorite subjects, creativity, how to get there, how to do it, how to build it.
Yeah, how to build it. And one of the things I'm just going to go right to this thing, because we were talking about this before we started rolling, is you used to be a lawyer, and you were clerking for Sandra Day O'Connor on the Supreme Court?
Yes, when I realized I wanted to be a writer.
Was it something about, were you running from something or to something?
You know, that's a really good question, because I was having a great experience as a lawyer. Clerking for Justice O'Connor was amazing. I'd had a lot of great experiences. But some people really feel a calling. Where they feel like almost a compulsion to do something. And sometimes it's to be a doctor, sometimes, funnily enough, to be a circus performer. If you look, circus performers often have this overwhelming desire to perform in the circus. And mine, I felt kind of a compulsion to write. And I always had this sense that I was sort of digressing. Everything that I was doing was great, but it was sort of not exactly where I was supposed to be. And finally, I think when I was clerking, I got to the point where I just felt the call so strongly to become a writer. It was more about going somewhere than leaving someplace.
I love that, and I'm on record saying if you don't write your own script, someone else will write it for you. Mm-hmm. And I was nearly a victim. I was literally thinking about this morning when I was lying in bed. I have a little gratitude practice, and I'm like, I'm so glad that I followed my gut, my intuition. I bailed on a bunch of previous careers. We talked about that, and I ran to becoming a photographer, which was something in me told me that that's what I needed to do. How common is that story? Because if I was told to go do these other things, I was going to be a doctor and a professional athlete, and you a lawyer. Do we have is there a systemic problem that's telling us to be things we don't want to be, or how should we think about that?
I think of it as drift, and drift is, and that's what happened to me. It wasn't that people were telling me what to do, it was just that I wasn't spending the time really searching within myself and asking hard questions like, what did I really want to do? And I think drift is what happens when you take the path of the least resistance. So you don't want to ask yourself hard questions. You don't want to risk conflict with somebody who's important to you. Your mom's a doctor, your dad's a doctor, and everybody's like, why don't you you're great in math and science, why don't you become a doctor? And you're like, okay, I'll go to medical school, and you do fine. And you sort of never stop and say, do I want to be a doctor? And then at some point sometimes that works out.
Yeah,
and that's what's tricky about drift, because sometimes it works out. But you always run the risk when you're not making a conscious choice that you kind of end up someplace. A lot of time after spending a lot of time and energy doing something that then you leave behind. And so I think whenever you feel like you're being carried forward by events, or when you're doing what everybody else is doing. I'm getting married because all my friends are getting married, so I should be getting married.
Alarm bell.
Alarm bell. Or if you have feelings like this can't go on, but it does go on. Or like if you have a fantasy of like, well, maybe I'll break my leg and then I won't be able to do it. You know, kind of fantasies of sort of emergency relief. These are the kind of things that point you towards drift.
So was there drift in your case?
It was an enormous drift.
Just going to oh my gosh, I got this opportunity standard out.
No, I mean, and that's exactly what happened. So like my father's a lawyer. He's a really, really happy lawyer. So I had that in my life, and I'm good at research and writing, and that's good for law school. And then people say things about law school like, it's great preparation. It's a great education. You'll keep your options open. You can change your mind later, you know? And so it was a choice, it was a non-choice choice. And I'm really good at taking tests. And so it was like, well, I'll take the LSAT and see how I did. And I did really well in the LSAT. I'll apply to law school, see where I get in. Oh, I got an EL law school. Can't say no to EL law school. And I was like, oh, you just got a Supreme Court clerkship. I'm like, yes. You know what I mean? Like I was carried along. And all these were wonderful experiences, so I don't regret them. But I was doing it kind of for all the wrong. And you know, people say, well, why is it that lawyers are so unhappy? And I'm like, people who want to be lawyers love being lawyers.
Yeah.
I have so many friends who love being lawyers. But if you go to law school because you can't think of anything better to do with yourself, and then you don't like it, it's kind of like you might as well have gone to like engineering school. And it's like, maybe it'll work out for you, maybe it won't. So I think it's all about this idea of really knowing what you want and making a decision that's right for you, not what your fantasy self is, not what other people expect of you, not what's the easiest thing. But to really say, well, what do I want? You know, and that's very uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
It's like worse than buying a bikini, looking in the mirror and
the last
facing
bikini
it.
I bought was,
yeah, that's right.
was rough. It was rough, let me tell you. I'm going to put a pin in that idea for a second of knowing yourself.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. But
it's
before
like
we go
the key
there,
to everything.
Yeah, it is. It's very powerful. But before we do that, so I've talked at length on this show and others around going from 0 to 1, and there's a huge population of people who are paying attention to this right now, and like, I'm curious. I don't natively identify as creative. And then there's a whole other section of people who are like, yeah, I've stepped into that world. I'm leaning into creativity. That's part of. I'm a designer, a photographer, an entrepreneur. I look at building businesses as something very creative. And what I love about you and your story is that you made the 0 to 1 jump. And then when you were in the 1 category, you went from 1 to 10 and became a massively successful writer. So I'm going to harvest all of your information over the course of the next hour. But how do you think, was there a shift in mindset from you when you were going from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10?
I don't think so. I think for me, it was very much like once I was able to articulate for myself the desire that I wanted to become a writer, and I was really lucky because that took the point. I became obsessed with an idea, which I started researching, which is something that I do often for fun. Like I'll often get really preoccupied with something and do a ton of research on it. Like I just went through this period of being obsessed with Thomas Merton. So this was something that was familiar to me, but this was a topic where I was just doing more and more and more research, and I was spending more and more time. And it finally, it finally started to occur to me, this is what somebody would do if they were going to write a book. And some people write books as their job. They don't do it as in their free time, like after work. And maybe I should do it. And so I was lucky because I wanted to become a writer, but I knew the book that I wanted to write. Because sometimes people are like, well, I want to be a writer, but I don't know what is it that I want to do. And so my book was called, I had asked myself the question, what am I interested in that everybody in the world is interested in? And I thought, well, power, money, fame, sex, and that became my first book. So I was doing this gigantic research project around
just those
power, money,
topics.
Fame, sex. It's called A User's Guide. And once I was like, this is a book I want to write, and I want to try to become a writer, I was like, at a certain point, I was like, I would rather fail as a writer than succeed as a lawyer. So I need to make the jump. I was fortunate because my husband and I were both living in D.C. We moved from D.C. to New York, and he also left law to go into finance. And so it was sort of like this very obvious kind of break in our lives. Like we have law jobs, now we moved to New York, and now we don't have law jobs. And I remember the day when we got a letter from the New York Bar Association asking, we had to pay our bar fees. And I said to my husband, should we pay our bar fees? He's like, no, we're never going back. Now I know that you can, like, if you just pay up your missing bar fees, you can go back onto the bar, so whatever. But it felt very important at the time. And so once I did that, once I made that mental shift, then I felt like it was just like, I was constantly like, okay, well, what's the next thing I have to do? Okay, so I have to get an agent, right? Or I have to write, first I had to write a proposal because I had to get an agent. So I have to write a proposal. What does that look like? I went to the bookstore and got a book called like How to Write and Sell Your Nonfiction Book Proposal. Okay, so I did that, and then I got an agent. And and each of these things it felt like a really big ordeal. But it was just sort of like, as I did one, then the next thing presented itself. And that's what I've done ever since.
There's a huge lesson in there. It's like you don't actually have to do all of the steps.
Yes.
What you really have to do is do the next step.
Yes.
Or whatever's right in front
of you.
Yes,
and you can get overwhelmed if you're thinking about, oh my gosh, like, what would it take? But if you're just like, well, all I have to focus on now is what's the next step for me.
Yeah, and people, I feel like they ask, like, well, when will I know if it's time to fill in the blank?
Ooh, that's so hard.
Yes.
So yeah, I think for us it was nice that there was kind of an artificial break where there was kind of a logical time to switch. And that made it easier.
Okay, so then you start writing.
Yeah.
Because you don't just go right out and write a book. You start writing, presumably, or did you just did you go chapter 1, ding, and then
Well, I had been
writing?
doing all this work on it like in my free time for fun. So I had this gigantic thing, but I had to write a proposal. Which is like a whole other kind of writing, and write a sample chapter and a table of contents and all that. And my book was odd. It was sort of like it's kind of like the preppy handbook meets Machiavelli's The Prince. So there were a lot of like boxes and like it was meant to be this sort of very funny, non-traditional book. And so there was a lot, there were like kind of a lot to manage just in presentation of it.
Got it. So let's go back to the thing I said I was going to put a pin in.
Oh, yeah.
Which is knowing yourself. Because presumably, well, you said something interesting a second ago, which was I had been doing this thing in my spare time.
Yes.
So that's step one that people I think a lot of times overlook. Like if you're a lawyer, what can I do to start writing? Well, start writing. Like the verb is to write.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, like do what you do in your, like what do you do when you're just like left to your own devices? And here's a great example of that.
Okay.
I have videos on my site, and the way that I found the person who makes the videos, my videographer, this was a woman who, she had like left the workforce, Maria Giacchino, and then she did this, our children were in kindergarten together, and she did this amazing video of the kindergarten year. And when I was like, oh my God, she's so amazing. And then we had a mutual friend who also had kids at the school, and as a favor to her, Maria did this woman's book trailer. And I was like, that's an amazing book trailer. Will you make a book trailer for me? And she's like, sure. I'm like, I'll hire you. Then she did a great book trailer for me, and then I'm like, well, I need somebody to make videos for me every week. Will you do it? And she's like, okay. So, she was just doing what she was doing for fun, which is like make a little kindergarten video. But that was just doing what she did, and then that was enough to put her in the game, kind of. And then other people were like, I'll hire you, and I've seen that you've done this great work.
I think you probably know the author, researcher, Brene Brown.
Oh, sure, yes.
Yeah, so she's like very much, she's been on the show before, 2 times actually. I'm talking about putting yourself out there, being in the arena.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, the arena, the way she talks about it is like a lot of people can see you and you might be subject to ridicule, but also it's like there's a lot of people in the arena and you're connecting with other people. And you say you're a writer, other people in your life. There's something about declaring your writerness or something like that.
But see, this is why I think all this new technology is so great, because like you can have a blog and you can be blogging regularly and that can be part of your identity, and so you are writing. You're a lawyer, but you're also writing. You are part of the blogger identity. There's ways now that you can enter into the frame. It used to be you were either an unpublished writer or you were a published writer, but now it's like you could be self-published, you could be published online, you could have an amazing Twitter feed that like 1 million people follow. Like there's so many ways I feel like to get into the arena now in a way that you control yourself. There's no gatekeeper to keep you out, and you can start putting it out there and seeing what response you get. And then I know literary agents who have seen people's stuff online and said to them, like, do you want to write a book because your stuff is really good? Now that's rare.
Rare, yeah.
That doesn't
don't
often
build your
happen.
life around that.
Yeah, don't build your life around it. But again, it's like sort of put yourself out there and kind of own whatever it is that you want to do in a kind of low stakes, low investment way, because it can really pay off then later when you're trying to make that transition.
When you quit the bar and decide that you're going to do this full time, you've already had a whole sort of body of work behind you.
Yeah.
All right, so you said, another key word in there, it's like yourself a couple times in that last phrase, or that last paragraph, and then I'm going to pin that back to the thing that we said we were going to get back to, which is knowing yourself.
Yeah.
So many people, I end up being a little bit of a therapist as a professional creative and someone who puts a lot of content out in the world. Like, oh my gosh, how do you know if, I know I don't want to do this thing, but I don't know what I do want to do. Or
that's hard.
I love taking pictures. I don't know what I take pictures of. How do I make a living? So how do we know ourselves? Or you talk a lot about knowing yourselves around habits. And so what's step one in because you, correct me if I'm wrong, you talk about needing to know yourself before you actually prescribe what you should do or something. There's something like,
right.
Yeah, so give me step one on that.
Well, one of it is, specifically with habits, is a lot of times people are sort of like, these are the 7 habits of highly creative people. They do this. They get up early in the morning. They write 800 words a day. They, and you're like, ooh, that's what I need to do, and then I will be highly creative. No. What I found, and I think it's just irrefutably true, is that there is no magic one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to habits or happiness or anything. And then we always have to begin by saying, like, what's true for us. So you might say, oh, I get up at 5 a.m. and write, and my 5 to 7 a.m. is, it's quiet, my mind is fresh, I just done my meditation. It's like amazing. This is what everybody should do. But it's like, well, some people are night people, and they're not at their most creative until 4 p.m. So for them to get up early and try to write is like nonsensical. It's just not right for them. It's not that you're wrong or they're wrong. It's just that people are different. And so when you're trying to create your habits, it's really important to start by saying, well, what kind of person am I? What's true about me? And like another thing that comes up is simplicity lovers and abundance lovers. Simplicity lovers like clean surfaces, bare walls, quiet, few choices, and that's how they feel like they have focus and creativity and energy. Abundance lovers like a lot of buzz, a lot of profusion, a lot of choices, people running around, a lot going on. There's nothing wrong with that either. And a lot of times people are like, if you're going to be creative, you have to clean up your desk. No, it's not necessarily true. And I'm sure you've seen the amazing book, Mason Curry's book, Daily Rituals, which is all about the habits of the super, super genius people. And what you see,
they're all over the place.
They're all over the place.
Yep.
So one person gets up early and one person stays up late, and one person drinks coffee and one person drinks vodka, and one person works in a crowd and one person works all by themselves, and one person works a half an hour a day like Gertrude Stein, and another person works 14 hours a day like P.G. Wodehouse. I mean, it's like there's just you can't prescribe. You have to begin by knowing yourself. And so I think that's the first thing for people to do. Say, like, well, when do I do my best work? When have I succeeded in the past? What attracts me? What idea attracts me? Does it attract me, the idea that I would get up at 5 a.m.? Maybe that sounds great, or maybe that sounds like hell. You just sort of think about it. I think a lot of times we're kind of adrift, and we're reacting instead of saying, like, well, what's true for me? How should I shape my environment, my schedule as much as I can to suit myself?
Is it fair to say that in Gretchen Rubin's world that step one is knowing yourself?
Yes.
Is that fair? Okay, so there are many ways.
Which is, by the way, like the most ancient advice of all time. It's on the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Know thyself. Okay, so yeah, TM, Gretchen Rubin. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I take credit for that.
I love it. So if that's the case, do you have some things? Let's go tactical for a second. Super tactical.
How do you know yourself?
How do you know yourself?
I have some good questions.
How do you know yourself? And what do you do in order to, do you record this? Or do you just go, oh yeah, I'm that kind of person? Yeah. Do you write it down? Do you do a daily journal?
Yeah.
So how do you know yourself? And then what's the actual mechanism for putting that down so you can reference it often?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned that I have a podcast with my sister, and one of our recurring segments is called Know Yourself Better. And we try to pose a question that will help people know themselves better. So one of the questions was, do you like to discuss long or discuss short? Because sometimes people who are going through a big thing want to discuss it at length. And some people want to just discuss it as short as possible. And that's just a helpful thing to know about yourself. So I think a lot of times these, just to constantly be asking yourself questions or noticing how you're different from other people. And certainly in all my books, I try to point out those things. But here are some questions that I think are particularly helpful.
Get out your pen and paper, or you can rewind this as many times as you want. Reference material.
So this question is a very uncomfortable question to ask, but it was actually one of the questions that was most helpful to me. Whom do you envy? Because when you envy we often don't like to admit that we feel envy because it's so uncomfortable. But when you envy someone, they have something that you wish you had. And that's a really, really important clue. And when I was thinking about switching to becoming a writer, I got one of those magazines, those alumni magazines that you get, and it reports on like everybody in your class in college. And I noticed that when I was reading about people who had really cool law jobs, I felt a kind of mild interest. And when I read about people who had really cool writing jobs, I felt sick with envy. So it's like that was telling me they had something that I wish I had. And so thinking about whom you envy,
Ooh, this is powerful medicine.
Yeah. Okay, another thing to ask yourself to know yourself better is, what do you try to hide? Because if you're trying to hide something, then there's in some way that what you're actually doing is not in keeping with your values or with the values of the people around you, which might not be your values. But so like, if you're hiding the fact that you're visiting certain websites, or you're hiding the fact that you're spending 3 hours writing in your journal because you feel like other people won't approve, or whatever it might be, or you're hiding the fact that you love to sew, or
Closet sewer.
I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah,
Sometimes people
they
feel that whatever, they have like complicated emotions, or sometimes it's things that are less healthy, like I'm hiding how much I drink, I'm hiding how much I'm spending. Anytime you look at what you're trying to hide, it's a big clue about how your life is not reflecting your values. Another thing that's really helpful to know yourself, and this is something that comes up particularly in areas of creativity and productivity, so it's a very specific question, but are you a marathoner or a sprinter? So marathoners are people like me. We like to start early, do a little bit every day, and we feel like that's how we get our best work. Creativity and productivity is when it's like, not up against a deadline, just like slow, steady work. But sprinters like the adrenaline of the deadline. They like being up against that crunch. They work long and intense, and they feel like that's what spurs their creativity. That's what crystallizes their ideas. If they start too early, they kind of burn out or lose interest, or they like waste time. And the fact is, a lot of times marathoners and sprinters tell each other they're doing it wrong. And for a long time, I would tell sprinters, like, no, you've got to start early, you've got to do a little bit each day, and then I'm like, no, that's what works for me, because I'm a marathoner. But if you're a sprinter, it's not going to work for you. Yeah, and it can be hard to work with sprinters.
Yes, for sure.
But a lot of times, like my sister's a television writer, and she was working with a showrunner. A showrunner is like the boss of the writers.
Yeah.
And he really believed, he was a sprinter, and he believed that's how people did their most creative and best work. And so he would artificially engineer crises to put people into sprint mode. But
marathoners.
But a marathoner like my sister was just driven mad by this, and to her it seemed totally unnecessary and also counterproductive. So it's just a good way, you know yourself, and then also other people. So you can say like, well, we have a work environment. How do we create a circumstance where we can both do our best work, and maybe we can complement each other, but we just have to have a vocabulary for understanding who we are and how we do our best work.
Man, so those questions alone can get you a long way. I was just sort of replaying, how would I have answered those questions in that world where I was living the script that other people had written for me?
Yeah.
And that big shift of shifting over to my own script. I wish I had those questions, because I wrestled I think so many folks at home, even if you're, we talked about the two groups, if you're going from 0 to 1, it's especially hard to get out of that mindset.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to get better, like what actually is that you want to do, because you have to lean into something in order to get really good at it, all the 10,000 hours, and we've talked a lot about that.
But when it comes to knowing yourself better, I created this personality framework, which I think is actually the most helpful thing in how to know yourself better. It's a little bit longer explanation.
I've heard this talk. It's a great talk. It's a great talk.
Okay, so, and it has to do with how people deal with expectations. And now it's a lot of what we've been talking about today. It's like outer expectations. So there's outer expectations, like a work deadline, a request from a spouse, what your parents want you to do. And then there's inner expectations, your own desire to write a novel in your free time, your own desire to keep your New Year's resolution. So there are upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. Upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations alike. They keep the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. So I'm an upholder, and if I look back on my history, it was very upholder. It was like I had no trouble doing what law school expected of me, and then I had no trouble doing, like switching and becoming a writer without anybody helping me. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they hate anything arbitrary or inefficient. They'll do something if they feel like it's justified. And they love information, they love customization. Then obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So they have no trouble meeting a work deadline, But if they want to write a novel in their free time and no one's checking up on them, they can struggle.
Yes.
And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do when they want to do it in their own way. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And they don't even like to tell themselves what to do. But I think in the context of what we're talking about, the biggest tendency, the one that has the most people, is obligers. And I think a lot of times when people want to switch careers, they're caught because in their day job, they're surrounded by accountability. They have deadlines, they have a boss, they have coworkers, they have
Bills,
all these
they have all these,
they have all these expectations on them, but they have this secret desire, this inner expectation. I'm going to become a writer. I'm going to become a photographer. I'm going to start a blog. I'm going to switch to be, a caterer, whatever it is. But there's no outer accountability, and so they just are paralyzed and stall out. And so the answer for anyone who's experiencing that is outer accountability. Like start an accountability group with other people who are going to hold you accountable. Hire a coach who's going to hold you accountable. Get a client. You want to be a photographer? Get a client.
Yeah.
And like say you'll do it for free or volunteer and do it so that somebody's like, okay, hey man, where's that project? I need it. So you feel accountable, and then you're part of that system of accountability. Because I think a lot of people who are frustrated with themselves, they just need that outer accountability, and then they start keeping up with it.
Unless you're the rebel.
Well, yeah, if you're a rebel, you want to do what you want to do when you want to do it. And so you just have to make up your mind, well, what do I want? You're like, you know what? I really don't want to be doing this. I want to be doing something else. And then rebels find it pretty easy to switch. They find it'd be harder for them if somebody, when they have a job maybe that they like they're doing something that's, in fact, I'm thinking of a specific rebel who emailed me where she had a job that she really liked, but it was difficult for her. It made it less fun in a way that she had to do what her clients wanted her to do. But that was like the essence of the job.
That's the essence of having a client.
She had to keep reminding herself, like, I'm doing this work because it allows me to do this work. And so it's a pain for me to have this deadline, but this is what allows me the freedom to do what I want and make my own rules. I took this job. I'm a freelancer. I could take this job or not. It's totally up to me. I decided to take it. So in a way, even though I feel like they're telling me what to do, I'm really telling myself what to do. And so, but they had to go through that kind of rebel mindset.
Is there a problem with people misidentifying themselves on purpose? Like, because they want to be something else? Or?
It's funny that you say that. A lot of people do kind of are in denial a little bit. But in all of them, though, I heard from somebody, I love being an upholder, but I heard from somebody who's like, I really wish I weren't an upholder. I feel like I should be more laid back. I feel like I should be more easygoing. And I was like, I like being not laid back and not easygoing, but so yeah, but I think like anything having to do with self-knowledge, there can be an element in self-knowledge of sadness. Because to say who you are is to admit everything that you're not. Like one thing about me is I'm not that into music. Like I get that other people really like it. I understand the cultural significance. I wish I liked it. Just not that into music, and that's sad. It's a limitation. But now that I don't try to pretend like I like music, I have more fun time for the things that I really like, and I don't waste time worrying about what I'm not. And so I think with the tendencies, it's more like you get what you get and you don't get upset. It's how do I harness the strengths of my tendency and offset the limitations rather than wishing that I was a different kind of wishing I were a different kind of person, because you're stuck with yourself,
let me go one deeper. Let's go, because I'm sensing some psychological trauma on the other side of the camera. People are like, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to admit that about myself. Any tips for how to sort of process that? Like I am an obliger. We'll just use you. Okay. So you can talk openly about you. Like you're an obliger.
I'm an upholder.
You're an upholder, and you're happy to be an upholder.
Yes.
Did you know that was you?
Going in when I created this framework. No, and that was the amazing thing about creating this framework. So I was starting to write better than before, and I was starting to see these weird patterns in how people formed habits, or like when they didn't form habits, what they would say. Like all these people kept saying to me, I would say to them, one of my test questions was, how do you feel about New Year's resolutions? And a surprising number of people gave me exactly the same answer. They would say, I would never keep a resolution on January 1st because that's an arbitrary date. If it's important to me, I'll do it whenever. And that was just striking to me because I'm like, it's the arbitrariness of it that bothers them. That would not have even really occurred to me, but clearly for them, that's a thing.
That's a thing.
Or like a lot of people would say things like a friend of mine said, you know I would be happier if I had the habit of exercise. And when I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? And I was seeing like, I did NaNoWriMo. And I had no trouble writing a novel in a month, but why can't I write a novel? Why can't I write every day now? And so I was trying to figure it out. So I came up with these personality frameworks. And it took months, and it was like the hardest, most intellectually challenging thing I've ever done is to try to see the pattern. And when I finally identified it, and I realized that I'm an upholder, well, it turns out upholder is like, it's very rare and it's a very extreme personality. And I basically had to go back and rewrite all of Better Than Before because I went into it thinking that I was very typical. And what I learned from it is actually I'm an extreme rare personality. And I remember going into my husband and being like, you know what? I'm like this extreme, fringy person. Yeah, and he's like, you think? Like nobody was surprised at me. But what was interesting about it was seeing how a lot of times people think, well, there's something wrong with me. Everybody else has got this figured out. There's a problem with me. And there's a huge relief in understanding like there's a whole bunch of people who have exactly the same thing as I do. And there's no shame in that.
Millions and so just millions and millions of people.
Yeah, so just build in whatever infrastructure you need to like get where you want to go. And you don't have to feel bad about it, because sometimes in all of the tendencies, you'll see people saying like, well, I felt bad about, upholders will say like, everybody tells me that I'm rigid. That's what people always tell upholders. And you're like, and then you hang out with other upholders and they're like, oh yeah, everybody tells us we're rigid. We like this, Or questioners, questioners will sometimes say like, I can get stuck. I get analysis paralysis because I'm questioning and questioning and questioning, and I want perfect information, and I get swept up in the beauty of research, and I can't move forward. And it's like, that's a very common thing to happen to questioners. That's like, there's ways to deal with that because a lot of people experience that. And then it's like, okay, well, it's just a thing that happens to people, and there are solutions, and here's what other questioners do. And so then you don't feel so like alone with your own weird idiosyncratic problems.
Can we go one level deeper?
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about each of these? Like, and presumably you did a ton of research.
Yeah, I'm writing a book about them now, so I'm like obsessively thinking about the four tendencies left and right. Yes.
Okay, so for those people, like what are? I'm a huge advocate of trying to get people to lean into their strengths.
Yes.
Instead of trying to better your weakness, what is your strengths?
Yes.
And you said something about building the structure around you.
Yeah.
For like to fix, not fix, because that's
offset,
the wrong word. Offset.
The limitations.
There you go, thank you. Offset.
Buttress.
Offset or support the things that you're not strong at.
Yes.
So what are some characteristically strong things that people who have each one of the four personality types, they're good at this and not good at that. And just realize that you might be special, but we're talking like generally so that we can get some real tactical stuff for you folks at home.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody wants to take a quiz, most people can tell what they are right away, but there is a quiz at happiercast.com/quiz. There's a quiz that will give you an answer. And I want to say, like, these aren't meant to be identities that box you in or make you feel cramped. They're meant to just illuminate patterns so that you can sort of see how you could maybe easily fix something that you've been frustrated by. So upholders. So upholders, it's great to be an upholder in a lot of ways because it's like you easily meet inner and outer expectations. So they put a lot of value on kind of performance and follow through, but they're also good at taking time for themselves because they see that's an inner expectation. But they have this weird thing, and again, I thought this was like my own private weird problem, but it's very widespread among upholders, which is tightening. So like a lot of times people will start with like a habit, and over time it kind of loosens up. But for upholders, it will often get tighter. And so you could be somebody who's like, you know what, like 5 days a week, I want to get up and write for 2 hours in the morning. Well, pretty soon then it's like starting to be every day you're going to get up and write for 2 hours in the morning. And then it gets to the point where like if one day you can't do it because like your kid's sick, you feel really uncomfortable because you're like, I got to get my writing done. It's tightening on you. And it's very important for upholders to be aware of this so that they can like consciously loosen it up because you don't want to feel like you're this bureaucrat stuck checking the boxes of your own life in a way that becomes choking. And for upholders, that's a very real outcome, that things get tighter. Now, questioners, they love research, they love information, they love to customize. They can get analysis paralysis if they can't move forward or they can't make a decision. I have a friend who's a questioner married to a questioner, and they didn't have a dishwasher for 2.5 years because every time they were going to buy a dishwasher, it's like, well, why this one? Why not that one? Maybe we should do the countertops. Maybe we should redo the kitchen. Maybe we should move. Like there was no end to the questions, and so you have to figure out like I'm going to give myself a deadline, or I'm only going to explore 10 possibilities, or I'm going to follow a trusted advisor. So, for instance, let's say you're a questioner and you're like, well, I want to start a blog. Okay, well, what platform should I use? Well, I'm going to research and research and research and research and research, and then finally you're like, okay, pick somebody that you trust, whose blog you like, and say, what platform do you use? If it's good enough for you, it's probably good enough for me, because otherwise I could spend a year stalling, trying to make the perfect decision. Yeah. So you want to be able to like figure out ways to offset when the questioning is becoming, and in a way, always with the tendencies, is you want to appeal to the tendency if it's getting out of control. So you would say to a questioner, and this is my husband is a questioner, so I would say to him, it's becoming inefficient how much questioning you're doing, because efficiency is a core value of questioners. So you say, it is not serving your values and your aims to do so much questioning. So it has to come to an end, and that's ultimately what's efficient and justified. And they're like, okay. Obliger is the biggest tendency. So all of us are either obligers or we're surrounded by obligers, because they're the biggest tendency. Okay. For an obliger, like they're the rock of the world,
They make stuff happen. The trains run on time.
Yeah. They come through for you. And here's the thing about obligers, though. They feel like they're being taken advantage of. And they are. Upholders, questioners, and rebels.
We all rely on them.
We all will take advantage of obligers. And so they're not wrong to think that. And so what obligers, when they enter in this place of frustration because they're not meeting their inner expectations, they just have to build in that outer accountability. And so it could be starting an accountability group. It could be having a coach. It could be having a client. It could be teaching a class. If you want to learn how to do Photoshop, maybe you volunteer to teach a Photoshop class at your local church, and it's like, well, you better learn Photoshop pretty quick, because like tomorrow at 2 p.m. a bunch of people are going to show up to hear you talk.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of ways to build in accountability once you realize that is what is the necessary piece. Now, but here's another interesting thing about obligers, and it's worth mentioning because there's so many obligers. Obligers have this pattern where they will meet expectations, and then they will snap, and almost arbitrarily, they will...
I'm not going to do it.
Not going to do it. And funnily enough, a lot of this can be small and funny, like a lot
or
of...
Or horrible, probably, yeah.
Or horrible.
Yeah.
It can destroy relationships. It can blow up marriages. You can walk out on a job. And often obligers are super valuable employees. So you don't want somebody to just be like, you know what, you're dead to me. I'm out of here. You want somebody to say like, how can we make this right? Like, you're too valuable for us. We don't want to lose you like this. And so if you're around an obliger, you are an obliger, you don't want to get to that place of deep resentment and burnout, because it can be very destructive. And like a lot of times obligers even will have like a pattern where they will keep going to a job and then
build up resentment over
building
time.
up so much resentment and then going from one to another. But obligers often can be very frustrated. Like I had a friend, and I'm sure you've seen examples like this, where he was at a big nonprofit, very, very productive guy, but he'd always had a dream of starting a textile company. And so he decided he was going to take a year off and try to start this company. Now, knowing what I know now, I know he's an obliger, I would say, what is your system of accountability? Do you have a coach? Do you have an accountability group? Do you have a client who's going to put in an order for you? What are you going to do to have accountability? But he didn't have any accountability.
Danger.
And he was paralyzed and did nothing. And then eventually went back to his old job and felt like he had wasted his opportunity to make his dream come true. And it was very poignant. And the thing is, the only missing piece to me is that accountability. If there had been, because when he was in his job, he never thought about it. Like the fact that he had supervisors and deadlines and colleagues and conferences to prepare for and reports to file and all that. He didn't even think about it. But then when all that infrastructure is taken away, he struggled. But it would have been so easy to put it in. So that's the thing for obligers. Outer accountability. It's the answer.
Right.
And then for rebels, it's always choice and freedom. What do you want? What do you feel like doing? Who are you? How do you want to express yourself? That's what they want. They can do anything they want to do.
The key operative word is want.
They want to want it. They have to want to do it. If you're dealing with a rebel and you're frustrated because they won't do what you ask or suggest that they do. You always think about the sequence: information, consequences, choices. So we have a client. This is our timeline. This is our budget. If we do a good job with this, this could be a permanent relationship. That means more cool projects and more money for all of us. Do you think this is something that your team could tackle?
Information,
consequences, choices.
I'm going to
tell you the situation. I'm going to tell you the consequences of that situation.
Positive and negative.
Yeah.
Negative.
And like even with like a little kid, you could say something like, if a person plays outside all day in the hot sun, they get a bad sunburn. If you get a bad sunburn, it really hurts. Your skin can blister and peel. Then you got to stay indoors. You're stuck inside for 4 days until your sunburn fades. Do you feel like wearing a hat and a long sleeve T-shirt, or do you prefer to wear lotion? It's
I think you might actually. This might be a real question from her to me. I feel like I have a this. It's logically resonating with me. I don't consider myself a rebel, but like the way that you just laid it right out right there, that was pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah.
And the fact that it worked on small children.
Yeah. No, and adults. No. I mean, because this was my big question, because all these people were like, "How do you get a rebel to do anything?" And so I asked all these rebels, how do you get a rebel to do something? And it's like, oh, and you can't lecture. You can't lecture and you can't micromanage. You can't keep looking and reminding. You can't keep checking on them. Information, consequences, choice. And then turn away and it's over to them. And you have to let them accept the consequences, which can be hard.
Which can be hard. Okay.
So those are the 4 tendencies.
That was incredible. And there's a little bit of medicine for each of them. Yeah. Very, very tactical. I love it. Now, let's go to step maybe back a little bit more. And I want to shift the conversation to some habits. I am on record as a habit person, and I'll say I came to this, it wasn't something that was native in me, but I came to it because I realized that just an objective, like I want to be able to run a 4.5 second 40 meter dash or 40-yard dash. I don't know where that Canadian part of me came. I'm not even Canadian. But just a simple thing that was well defined. I often could get there and ring the bell, but I didn't. I felt like it didn't maintain.
Yes.
Like it didn't stick.
Yep.
Or just run
okay,
up there.
This is the thing. Goals are a really good way to meet a goal. They're not a good way to form a habit. Perfect. Finish lines are not good for habits.
That was my experience, and it was really sort of later in life. I'll even say recently that I realized that what I was actually, like, I wanted to always be able to run a 4.540 or always be able to, maintain a clear state of mind or whatever the thing was.
You wanted consistent progress.
Yeah, consistent outcome, consistent progress. And that, again, I feel it's so simple when you stand back and think about it, but I had to switch over to habits. And it's like, what do I want? I want these things, and those things are, health or happiness or whatever. And what are the conditions that put me in that state? And the condition is I meditate. If I meditate every day, if I exercise every day, if I do something creative every day, whatever, then it's almost impossible for me not to live in this state. Yeah. So therefore, it took me some time. Yeah. To sort of narrow down 10 habits. And those 10 habits is what I largely attribute to being able to create a living and a life that I love. Yeah. So am I normal? Am I right in thinking those things that I just thought? Or am I a weirdo and I manipulated my own psychology to get an outcome? Well, no, I think
I think you had a profound insight that frankly has eluded many a habit expert, which is that it's something like losing 30 pounds, giving up sugar for Lent, doing a 30-day yoga challenge. Like, those are great ways to meet short-term goals, but when it comes to habits, you don't want to think about finish lines, because once you pass the finish line, you're finished. You want to think about milestones. So it's an exciting milestone to run that race, but that's just one of many milestones that you will pass in a lifetime of running. Or, oh my gosh, it's great that you launched this website, but that's just the beginning. That's not a finish line. That's like, you're going to keep going. You don't want to give up sugar for Lent. You want to eat healthfully forever. And so it's very easy to get swept away by these finish lines, but they don't really form habits, which is really more about thinking about how do I shape my life for the long term. And so one of the things you said is this is what you want every day to look like. This is like your perfect day. How can you have that day every day? And then you have the life that reflects your values. And so I think that habits have an incredibly helpful role to play. Now, Research shows about 40% of everyday life is shaped by habits. So if you have habits that work for you, the way you've figured out your habits, then you're just going to be happier, healthier, more productive, more creative.
I got to put on the table. Like, it took me a while to figure them out.
Sure. Know yourself and like what works. They're like the invisible architecture of everyday life. So they shape everything that we do. And habits can be freeing and energizing because once something's a habit, you don't waste any energy or time making decisions or using your self-control. So I don't decide, I have a lot of habits too. I don't decide to get up at 6 a.m. I don't decide not to eat dessert. Those are habits. They just happen on autopilot, so they're frictionless. So you don't wake up every day, should I meditate today? Well, I meditated yesterday, so maybe I should get a day off tomorrow. Or I'm going to do such a good job tomorrow. I'm going to start next month. And after that, it's going to be really easy. So then I'm going to so I don't have to meditate today because starting next month, I'm going to be so good. Or, oh, it's raining outside. I don't meditate well. I'm a little sleepy. I think it'd be better if I blah, 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 blah. This can
Does
go
this sound familiar to anybody out
this can go on for hours. So in my strategies, so I identified 21 strategies that you can use to make or break your habits. And the funniest strategy that I studied, and oh my gosh, this is my favorite chapter to work on, was the strategy of loopholes. Because if you can spot loopholes, then you can avoid them when they're undermining your habits. And like there's 10 categories of loopholes, and people are just so inventive about letting themselves off the hook. Yeah. Sure. And so I think that for most people, habits really can be super powerful. The thing that's important is to know that if you published your 10 habits, that I couldn't say like, oh, these are the magic habits. Chase has identified them. They are now like established, like, the table of the elements. And if we would all do this, we would all have equal success. Because these are carefully tailored over a lot of time. And it sounds like experimenting with yourself to find like the magic solution that is perfectly calibrated for you.
So true.
And that's just like meditation. I've tried meditation. All these people I know meditate. Okay, show me a million research things that show that. It doesn't work for me. I'm just saying right now, maybe they'll try it again, but I'm just like, I can live without it. So fine. Okay, so I'll do something else. It works for you. So somebody else can say like, maybe I'd like to try it. Maybe I don't. There's no magic answer. But the thing is, what you did was you put in the time, the self-knowledge, the experiment, and then you're like, and then one of the questions it says like, when do I succeed? When have I succeeded in the past? And when do I feel my best? And it might be like, it's funny. Everybody sits around telling me how I should, like have a clean desk, but I do better when I have a messy desk. Or I did an interview with Roseanne Cash, and she was saying how everybody said to her, like, to be creative, you really need to sit down and treat it like a job, and sit down at your desk at 9 o'clock and really, really take it seriously and don't wait till you're in the mood. And she said she always felt really guilty because she never could do that. And then she realized from reading my book, like, she's actually the kind of person who wanders around the house and writes like song lyrics on a Post-it note and sticks it on the ping pong table, and that's her process. And it's like, okay, if it works for you, Roseanne Cash, like, I don't think it needs fixing because whatever you're doing works for you. Yeah. And so whenever people start saying like, oh, this was working really well, but I deliberately changed it to be more like Albert Einstein, I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, if it's working for you, maybe you want to go deeper into that or try to understand it.
Is it fair to say that when you try and adopt someone else's habits or something that's been prescribed to you, that it's actually useful because you will learn if that is a thing for you or not?
Yes, because it's always worth experimenting. And sometimes things just sound so wrong that you're like, okay, getting up at 5 a.m., no. Like, see, I would love to get up at 5 a.m. That attracts me, but I would have to go to bed too early, and that would disrupt my life too much, but it attracts me. But for other people, that would never attract them. Or like when I first heard about National Novel Writing Month, somebody I hardly know was in a coffee shop, and she described it to me, and I'm like, I'm going out right now and buying Chris Beatty's book. I cannot wait to do this. It so attracted me. But for other people, they'd be like, that sounds awful. You know what I mean? So part of it is just like, think about it and maybe try it and say like, well, maybe that doesn't sound like something I would like to do, but I'll try it. This comes up a lot of times with resisting strong temptation, whether that's food, like resisting chocolate chip cookies, or technology, like Candy Crush. For some people, they do better when they give it up altogether. They have none. So it's like my sister had to delete Candy Crush because it was actually affecting her career. She couldn't play a little Candy Crush. And I don't eat any sugar because it's like once I have a little bit, I want a lot. And I just like, that's boring to me. I don't want to have to like have one cookie or, you know, like one scoop of ice cream. I want to have all the ice cream or no ice cream. But then those are abstainers. Moderators do better when they have a little bit. So maybe they want to play Candy Crush for 20 minutes, or they want to play it when they're in line at the store. And they just need to know they can have it a little bit. And so, but a lot of times, everyone is told that we should be moderate. Like, oh, give yourself a cheat day, follow the 80-20 rule, like don't be too rigid. But if it's not working for you, if you feel like I can't play World of Warcraft a little bit, I can't eat 2 French fries. Try abstaining, because like you say, spirit of experimentation.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it works better. Maybe you think you're one kind of person, but this would really work better for you. And it's like, what's the harm?
And it's
you don't need the Hubble telescope.
Right. And it's pretty efficient because you'll know after a few days,
Yes.
does this work for you or not?
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the thing that I did is like, oh, I want to do X, and I would just, some friend of mine suggested that I try this. It's a thing that works for him or her. Tried it, like, wow, that was super painful.
Right.
I know that that's not my
No,
solution
like
to
the
that
timer
thing.
method. So like, I love using the 15-minute timer. It's like they're crazy about it, and you're like, so try the timer method. It's like, well, I mean, you don't have to invest much to give that a shot. Yeah, exactly. And then for some people, it's the magic answer that solves everything. You know, and so maybe it will be for you, or maybe not. So try it.
Fair. And I want to, over the next 5 minutes, I want to cover 2 main topics. One topic is specifically creativity, and then one topic is Gretchen Rubin.
Ooh, okay.
So I'm going to go with the creativity first, and then we're going to finish with a bunch of Gretchen Rubin, like bam, 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 bam.
Okay. Lightning round.
Lightning round.
Lightning round. All right.
So around creativity, we've touched on it. It's been, I think, one of the dominant threads through our conversation. I really enjoyed and appreciated that. That's one of my core values and the thing that I'm trying to help people unlock in their lives. With respect to not being overly programmatic about you or this, or you have to do these things, can you talk to me about some, like, just the thread of creativity in your work?
Okay, yeah.
And what you've certainly seen some trends, and it's to be put through the lens of, hey, remember, everybody know thyself.
Yeah.
But talk to me about some sort of trends and connections that you see around creativity and how people can tap into it and access it.
Well, one thing is I feel like people have like the thing that is their kind of their milieu for creativity. So for some people, it's very visual. I have a friend who's an artist, and I remember her saying like she quit her job. Her day job when she first moved to New York was she was a receptionist at an art gallery. And then finally she was doing well enough with her art that she quit. And somebody said to her, well, now you're going to be working all the time. Meaning now that you have no job to fall back on, all you can do is be looking. All you can be doing is thinking about art. And but like, I'm not visual. For me, it's all about reading. It's always about reading. So what I do to stay creative is I just constantly am reading. And people often say like, oh, you must be a speed reader. You do so much reading. I'm like, I have to be reading all the time. Like I feel like my life, I crave it. And I'm constantly taking notes on what I read. And that's what is creativity for me, is this constant like taking in of words, processing ideas, writing down the parts that catch my attention, and then trying to think about where it could lead in my own thinking. And again, but like for someone who's visual, that wouldn't be attractive because they think about the world in a different way. So I think part of it is just, is like, I think it's about, for me at least, it's about constant exposure. But even I realized, like, if I go to I go to the Met.
You're taking notes.
No, and what I'm most interested in is the titles of the paintings. I'm like really interested in the titles of paintings. Like, I saw the figure 5 in gold. I'm like, best painting ever. Love that title. You know what I mean? And then I was like, well, I'm such, like, I cannot even get out of my own head. Or like Andy Warhol. I'm like, I don't care about his visual art. It's his writing that I love.
His books are crazy.
He's crazy.
Yeah, he's totally crazy.
I constantly quote him, right? Is he not the biggest genius?
I love, like, he's one of the biggest influences on my life.
Okay, we must have sidebar on Andy Warhol because he is completely, I think, really, as famous as he is, I kind of think that he's underappreciated for his thinking.
And he's, someone said, I think it was maybe Neil Strauss said that he is the most famous artist of all time, more famous than Picasso. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's interesting to me that you can have that sort of, you can be in that pool, even in the top few, and still be underappreciated because his work literally is everywhere. it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the fact that he took a Brillo box out of a grocery store and ended up in the gallery or in a museum. Like, that's just one of his many, like, usurping the traditional sort of way of thinking about something.
What were his ideas? Like,
his writing is wacko.
He has a mind like no one else. I mean, anyway, so that's what I'm saying. Like, we agree. It's like, there's his art, but then there's the words that underlie it that are so fascinating. So
is that? I mean, that's in a sense, it's still know thyself, because if you're visual, I'm painfully visual. Like, if I sit down in a meeting.
Well, you're a photographer. That makes so much sense.
It makes so much sense. Like, but I can't even sit through a meeting without like writing the words down. Like, oh, you just said something. I need to actually look at the words on the wall to remember them.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird, but so are we still bound to know thyself in order to be more
I think it's
creative?
the key to everything. I mean, I really feel like in the end, it's by knowing our own interests, our own values, our own taste, our own interests, our own temperament. Like, it all comes down to that.
What about the conflict, though, where you like, oh man, I really wish I was not visual, but I wish I was more of a writer or something like that, or more conceptual? Or is there, like, how do people reconcile conflict in themselves? Because certainly I guess I like being visual now that I think about it, but you've said it a couple times in the conversation, like, even don't deny yourself the thing. You could just say, like, I don't like music.
Right.
That's pretty bold statement, but you're like, I'm totally good with that now.
Yeah. No, I feel a sadness to it because it's a limitation. And I think sometimes, like, there's useful things on the edges. Like, if you say, like, well, I'm so visual, but like maybe there's a way I can incorporate text. Or like, I think a lot about images and the power of image. Like, I wrote a biography of JFK, and one of the things that I loved studying was the power of images and how he used images and how that. But I did it in kind of a writer. I had to like read books about images, like on photography.
Susan Sontag.
Yeah, right. Like, that's how the only way I could process it was through Susan Sontag's version of it. So I think that there's a lot of times something really interesting on the edges, and that you can kind of like pull in the bits, like the parts that make sense to you, and like maybe you're like Snapchat, like it's an image but it's gonna have this crazy piece of text, and I'm gonna have fun with that. But I think in the end you can become educated, you can expand, but I don't think you can really move the center of gravity of yourself. And I feel like you can waste so much time and energy trying to push against it and
fix your weaknesses.
Well, you're like you're saying, like you want to go deeper into your strengths. And also I feel like, and speaking of JFK, he said something one time that was so interesting. He said, people do best what comes naturally. And I always think to myself, is that true? Do I agree that people do best what comes naturally? I've thought about that constantly for the last 10 years. And in the end, I think people do best what comes naturally. And that's not to say that you can't expand it or become educated or like incorporate. But in the end, I think that it's very hard that your best work is not really coming from that center place. It seems to me.
Okay.
It certainly is for me.
These next questions will be very natural then, because they're about you. And so, what's something that people don't know about you they would be surprised if they did?
I'm very scared to drive. I'm really scared of driving. I do drive, but it was like a whole thing, and I hate driving. I dread it. Part of it is I live in New York, so I hardly ever drive. Habits, if you do something habitually, your emotional state becomes kind of muffled, and that would be good for me. If I did more driving, I would be less nervous, but I do not like to drive. And I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. Like, I got my license,
15.
Yeah, I was 16, yeah, no.
So, habits, do you have a list of habits that you look at every day, or are they ingrained?
I'm an upholder. It's just like part of me, yeah.
And how about a struggle that you had making something creatively that the world doesn't know about? Like, where did you really struggle?
I mean, the Four Tendencies was so difficult for me.
I was sitting this close to you, and I could see there's a little cringe when you said it. That was the hardest work I've ever done.
It was like I just had all this like loose kind of information floating around. I didn't know how anything fit together. I couldn't. Now it's a beautiful pattern that has kind of the elegance of a fern frond, So I'm like, it's like a nautilus shell, so it's got to be right. But I couldn't make sense of it, and it was a tremendous, and the whole habit book actually was a huge struggle because there was just so much information, and I couldn't figure out how to work. Like, should it be habits of creativity, habits of exercise, but then it'd be so redundant, and like it was making habits and breaking habits. Did that matter? Like, I couldn't like figure out the framework. I'm completely a person who needs structured thinking. Yeah. And I couldn't find my structure, and there was just more and more and more information flowing in. And I was getting crushed by it.
Can you name some of your favorite things?
Reading, writing.
How about be specific? What's a favorite book that people at home might want to pick up?
Ooh, see, yes, it's like, how do I even pick? I have a book club where like every month I recommend books, and I'm so happy. No, because I'm like, I can eventually I'll get to everything, but like just picking the one book.
All right, well, actually, then we'll just do that. You have a book club?
Yeah.
On your website?
Yeah.
GretchenRubin.com?
Yep, people can sign up. And every month, it's one book about happiness or habits or human nature, one work of children's literature, because I'm a crazy fan of children's literature.
I wanted to get there, but ran out of time.
And one eccentric pick.
One eccentric pick.
Right, just do something that...
I'll let you off the hook on that one because there's so much information on your website. And let's find out where people can know more about you on the internet. It's GretchenRubin.com.
Yep.
And then fill in the blanks on the rest of them.
Yeah, I'm Gretchen Rubin everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram.
What are you most passionate about in that world? Are you like a Facebooker? Are you an Instagrammer?
Podcast, I love them all because they all have different strengths and weaknesses. And so for me, it's like, how do you communicate ideas with other people? And each one has kind of its own power, but in my heart, I'm a writer. So in the end for me, the core thing, are my books. Yeah.
Great. I'm super grateful to have spent an hour
thank
with
you. This was we could talk all day.
I know, we really could. It was Angel said, like, oh my gosh, I said we're going to be done by 12:10, and it's 12:15. Folks at home, pay attention to Gretchen Rubin, GretchenRubin.com, Gretchen Rubin everywhere on the internet. She's been a huge influence to me, and I know she will for you too. Signing off until tomorrow. Not even next week or next month. You know, one of these tomorrow.